My son David told me to sleep in my car, just a few more weeks while his wife redecorated their guest room. 4 months later, I was still there, washing my face in gas station bathrooms. But then a letter arrived that would change everything, and suddenly, David couldn't call me back fast enough. At 58, I never thought I'd be living in a 2010 Toyota Camry behind a 24-hour diner in Phoenix, Arizona. The earthquake that hit our city 6 months earlier had been devastating, a 6.8 magnitude quake that destroyed my entire apartment complex on Maple Ridge Drive. 23 units, gone in less than a minute. I was one of the lucky ones who survived, but my life savings, my photos, my mother's china collection, everything was buried under tons of concrete and rebar. The insurance company played every trick in the book. Natural disaster exclusions, they called it. My policy covered fire, theft, even flood, but earthquake damage. That required a separate policy I'd never thought I needed in Arizona. After 6 months of fighting, they finally cut me a check for $8,400, enough to cover my medical bills from that night, but not enough to start over. At 58, with my marketing job eliminated in post-earthquake layoffs, I was truly starting from nothing. My son David had always been my success story. MBA from Arizona State, beautiful wife Melissa who worked in tech, their adorable 2-year-old son Tommy, and a gorgeous 4-bedroom house in Scottsdale with a pool and 3-car garage. When I called him from the Red Cross shelter, crying and broken, he didn't hesitate. "Mom, pack whatever you have and come stay with us. We're family. We'll figure this out together." Those first 2 weeks felt like a blessing. Melissa made my favorite lasagna, Tommy crawled into my lap for story time, and David assured me nightly that I could stay as long as I needed. "Take your time, Mom. Focus on healing, not finding a job." I helped with Tommy, cooked dinner most nights, and tried to make myself useful while job hunting online. For a brief moment, I thought maybe this tragedy would bring us closer as a family. But by week 3, I started noticing things. Melissa's smiles became strained. She'd clean up immediately after I used the kitchen, as if erasing evidence of my presence. David stopped asking about my job search and started mentioning apartment listings just to keep options open. Then came the announcement that would change everything. Melissa was pregnant again, due in 7 months. "We're so excited," Melissa announced over dinner, her hand resting protectively on her still flat stomach. "We've already started planning the nursery. The guest room has the perfect lighting and it's right next to Tommy's room." David nodded enthusiastically. "We want to start painting this weekend. You know how these projects can drag on." I sat there, fork halfway to my mouth, realizing they were discussing evicting me without actually saying the words. That night, David knocked on my door, well, their guest room door. "Mom, we need to talk." He sat on the edge of what had been my bed for 3 weeks, avoiding eye contact. "Melissa and I have been discussing the situation, and we think it might be time for you to find your own place." I asked where he expected me to go with $200 in my bank account and no job. He reached into his pocket and pulled out car keys. "You can use my old Camry. It runs great, gets good gas mileage. Just until you find work and save up for a deposit." The first night sleeping in that car was the longest of my life. David had driven me to a well-lit parking lot behind a 24-hour diner called Rosie's, assuring me it was safe and that the manager, Pete, wouldn't bother me. "It's just temporary, Mom. A few weeks at most." I arranged my 2 suitcases, everything I own now, to create a makeshift bed in the back seat. The desert gets cold at night, even in summer, and I shivered until dawn despite the blankets David had given me. Days blended into a harsh routine. Wake up at 6 a.m. before the morning rush started bringing customers to Rosie's. Drive to the public library when it opened at 9. Spend 8 hours applying for jobs, updating my resume, and trying to look professional despite washing my hair in public restrooms. The YMCA offered $5 day passes for showers, but only when I could afford them. Most days, I made do with baby wipes and dry shampoo from the dollar store. David texted me every few days at first. "How's the job hunt going, Mom, and hope you're staying safe." But I noticed he never asked where I was sleeping or if I needed anything. When I tried to call him one evening, desperate and hungry, Melissa answered. "Oh hi, Margaret. David's at a work dinner. I'll tell him you called." She never did. When I mentioned it to David later, he said, "Sorry Mom, things have been crazy with the pregnancy and Tommy's acting out because of all the changes." The job market for 58-year-old women was brutal. I had interviews at retail stores where 19-year-olds looked at my resume with confusion. "You were a marketing director. Why do you want to work at Target?" How could I explain that Target was the only place willing to interview me? That my professional wardrobe was now limited to 3 outfits I kept on hangers in the back seat of a Toyota Camry. The worst part wasn't the physical discomfort or even the hunger. It was the way I became invisible. People looked through me at the library, assuming I was just another homeless person taking advantage of free Wi-Fi. Store clerks watched me suspiciously when I counted out exact change for a $1 menu burger. Even David seemed to forget about me for weeks at a time. I was living 5 miles from my son's beautiful home, sleeping in a parking lot, and somehow I'd become someone he'd rather not think about. By month 4, I developed a system. Wake up in different locations to avoid complaints. Monday and Wednesday behind Rosie's Diner, Tuesday and Thursday at a 24-hour Walmart, weekends at a truck stop on the edge of town where nobody cared about another car in the lot. I knew every public bathroom in a 5-mile radius, which ones had hot water, which had soap dispensers that actually worked. This was my life now, and I was starting to accept that it might be permanent. It was a Tuesday morning, exactly 4 months and 3 days since David had given me those car keys, when I noticed the envelope tucked under my windshield wiper at the library. My first thought was a parking ticket, the last thing I could afford. But the envelope was cream-colored, expensive-looking, with Morrison and Associates, estate attorneys embossed in gold lettering across the top. Inside was a letter that would change my life forever. "Dear Ms. Margaret Torres," it began. "We represent the estate of your late cousin, Eleanor Hartwell, who passed away peacefully on October 15th at her home in Seattle, Washington. We have been attempting to locate you regarding a significant bequest in her will. Eleanor Hartwell." The name barely rang a bell, some distant cousin on my father's side who'd moved to Washington State in the 90s. We'd exchanged Christmas cards for a few years, but life had gotten busy and we'd lost touch. I couldn't remember the last time I'd spoken to her. I called the number on the letterhead with shaking hands, using my prepaid phone with its dwindling minutes. "Morrison and Associates," answered a professional voice. "This is Margaret Torres. I received a letter about my cousin Eleanor Hartwell's estate." There was a pause, the sound of papers shuffling. "Miss Torres. We've been looking for you for months. Please hold while I transfer you to Mr. Morrison." The wait felt eternal. "Ms. Torres, I'm James Morrison. I handled your cousin Eleanor's estate planning for 15 years. She spoke of you often, especially in her final months. She was quite concerned about your welfare after reading about the earthquake in Phoenix." He paused, and I could hear him turning pages. "Eleanor has left you her entire estate, her waterfront home in Seattle, valued at approximately $1.8 million, plus investment accounts, life insurance, and other assets totaling $340,000. After taxes and estate fees, you're inheriting approximately $2.1 million. I sat in that Camry in the library parking lot, phone pressed to my ear, unable to process what I was hearing. $2.1 million. The number seemed fictional. 4 months ago, I'd been a middle-class marketing director with a nice apartment and a decent savings account. 4 months of homelessness later, I was about to become wealthy beyond my wildest dreams. Miss Torres. Are you there? Mr. Morrison's voice brought me back to reality. Yes, I'm here. I just can't believe this is real. It's very real, Mr. Morrison assured me. Eleanor was quite specific in her instructions. She said, and I quote, "Margaret is the only family member who ever showed me genuine kindness without expecting anything in return." She remembered a sympathy card you sent when her partner Patricia died in 2019. Apparently, you were the only relative who acknowledged Patricia as family. I barely remembered sending that card, but Eleanor had treasured it enough to leave me everything she'd spent a lifetime building. That afternoon, I drove straight to the nicest hotel I could find and paid cash for a week's stay. The desk clerk looked surprised when I handed over 7 $100 bills, money I'd been saving for an apartment deposit. I didn't care. For the first time in 4 months, I was going to sleep in a real bed with clean sheets and take a hot shower that lasted as long as I wanted. As I sank into the bathtub, I finally allowed myself to cry, not from despair this time, but from overwhelming relief. I hadn't spoken to David in 2 weeks, but my phone started ringing at 7 p.m. His name appeared on the caller ID, and for the first time in months, I let it go to voicemail. Then Melissa called. Then David again. By the time I got out of the bath, I had 17 missed calls and 12 text messages. Apparently, news of Eleanor's estate had appeared in both the Seattle Times and the Phoenix Business Journal, and someone from David's social circle had seen my name. The voicemail started concerned and escalated to frantic. "Mom, it's David. Call me back, we're worried about you." Then, "Mom, where are you? Someone said they saw your name in the paper about an inheritance." Finally, "Mom, this is ridiculous. We're your family. Why aren't you answering your phone?" I listened to each message while room service brought me the first real meal I'd eaten in weeks, salmon with roasted vegetables instead of dollar menu burgers. The next morning, I was having breakfast in the hotel restaurant when I saw him. David stood in the doorway, scanning the room until his eyes found me. He looked different, stressed, older somehow. His usual confident swagger was replaced by something that looked almost like nervousness. He approached my table with the kind of smile I remembered from his childhood when he'd broken something and was hoping I wouldn't notice. "Mom. Finally. We've been worried sick about you." He leaned down to hug me, but I stayed seated, cutting my eggs Benedict with deliberate precision. "Worried?" I looked up at him. "When was the last time you asked how I was doing, David?" He pulled out the chair across from me without being invited. "That's not fair, Mom. You know we care about you. That's why we're here." I noticed Melissa approaching our table, looking perfectly put together as always, carrying Tommy on her hip. "Margaret." Melissa's voice carried that false brightness I'd grown to recognize. "How wonderful about your inheritance. Tommy, say hi to Grandma." My grandson looked at me with curious eyes. He was so much bigger than when I'd left 4 months ago. Children grow fast at that age, and I'd missed it all. "Hi, sweetie," I said softly, reaching out to touch his little hand. He smiled shyly and buried his face in his mother's shoulder. David signaled the waiter for coffee, already making himself comfortable. "So, Mom, this inheritance, it's incredible. Eleanor must have really cared about you." "She did," I replied. "Though I'm surprised you remember her name. You never showed much interest in that side of the family." David's smile flickered. "Well, family is family, right? The important thing is that your housing problem is solved. You can stop worrying about finding work and focus on enjoying your golden years." "Actually," Melissa chimed in, settling Tommy in a high chair the waiter brought over, "we were hoping you'd come stay with us while you figure out what to do with all this money. I feel terrible about how things ended before. Pregnancy hormones, you know. I wasn't thinking clearly." She rubbed her growing belly for emphasis. The nursery can wait. We want you to be comfortable. How generous of them to offer me back the guest room now that I was worth $2.1 million. I watched Tommy play with his toy truck, remembering the nights I'd put him to bed when I lived with them, the stories I'd read, the songs I'd sung. Had they told him where Grandma went? Did they explain why I disappeared one day and never came back? That's very kind of you both, I said carefully, but I've actually decided to move to Seattle. Eleanor left me a beautiful home there, and I think a fresh start might be exactly what I need. David's coffee cup paused halfway to his lips. Seattle. But Mom, your life is here. Your family is here. Tommy barely knows his other grandparents. We need you to be part of his life. I was homeless for 4 months, David. 4 months. And in all that time, you never once asked if I needed anything more than casual text messages about my job search. My voice remained steady, but other diners were starting to glance our way. That's not fair, David said, his face flushing. We had our own problems to deal with. Melissa's pregnancy was complicated at first, and Tommy was acting out because of all the changes. We thought giving you space to be independent was what you needed. Independent. What a lovely way to describe abandoning your homeless mother. I needed my son to care whether I lived or died, I said quietly. Instead, I got space. Melissa leaned forward, her perfectly manicured hand reaching across the table toward mine. Margaret, you're being unfair. We're not mind readers. If you needed help, you should have asked directly. I stared at her, this woman who'd made it clear I was an inconvenience in her perfectly ordered life. I did ask. I asked where I was supposed to go with no money and no job. Your husband handed me car keys and directions to a safe parking lot. The silence stretched uncomfortably. Tommy, oblivious to the tension, dropped his toy truck and started crying. Melissa automatically soothed him while David stared into his coffee cup. Finally, he looked up at me with something that might have been genuine remorse. Mom, I know we handled things badly. But we're family. Families work through problems together. Don't run away to Seattle because you're angry with US. I'm not running away, I said, signing the breakfast check with my new credit card, the first one I'd qualified for in months. I'm choosing to build a life around people who value my presence, not just my usefulness. I stood up, gathering my purse. Eleanor saw something in me worth investing in. Maybe it's time I saw it too. David stood as well, desperation creeping into his voice. Mom, please. Let's talk about this at home. Properly. Home. The word hung in the air between us. I don't have a home, David. I haven't had one since the earthquake. But I'm about to. I leaned down to kiss Tommy's forehead, breathing in that sweet toddler smell I'd missed so much. Goodbye, sweetheart. Grandma loves you very much. As I walked away, I could hear David calling my name, but I didn't turn around. Some bridges, once burned, can't be rebuilt with apologies and regret. 2 days later, I was on a plane to Seattle, watching the desert give way to forests and mountains. I'd never lived anywhere but Arizona, never been farther west than California for a college friend's wedding 30 years ago. As we descended through the clouds towards Seattle-Tacoma Airport, I saw the city spread out below, water everywhere, green hills, the Space Needle pointing toward gray skies. It looked like the beginning of a completely different life. Mr. Morrison met me at the airport, a distinguished man in his 60s with kind eyes behind wire-rimmed glasses. Ms. Torres, welcome to Seattle. Eleanor would be so pleased to know you're finally here. During the drive to her house, my house, he told me more about my cousin. She'd been a high school English teacher for 40 years, never married, but had shared her life with Patricia Chin, a nurse, for over 2 decades. They'd been together until Patricia's death from cancer in 2019. The house took my breath away. A 1920s craftsman-style home on Capitol Hill, with a wraparound porch and a view of Elliott Bay that belonged on a postcard. Inside, every room told the story of two women who'd built a life together with books, art, and carefully tended plants. The living room had built-in bookshelves from floor to ceiling, filled with classics and contemporary novels. The kitchen had been updated but maintained its vintage charm with original tile work and restored cabinets. In the master bedroom, I found photographs on the dresser, Eleanor and Patricia through the decades. Young women in the 1980s, middle-aged in family Christmas photos, elderly but radiant in what looked like a recent anniversary celebration. On the nightstand was a worn copy of Letters to a Young Poet, with margin notes in two different handwritings, as if they'd been having a decades-long conversation through Rilke's wisdom. The doorbell rang as I was exploring the sun-filled breakfast nook. A woman in her 70s stood on the porch, holding a casserole dish and smiling warmly. "You must be Margaret." "I'm Dorothy Chin, I live next door." Patricia was my older sister. I invited her in, and over the next 2 hours, she told me stories about Eleanor and Patricia's life together, their garden club, their annual Christmas parties, the way they'd cared for each other through illness and joy. "Eleanor worried about you," Dorothy said as we sat in the kitchen, sharing her homemade chicken pot pie. "She'd been following news about the Phoenix earthquake, and when she saw your name in a list of displaced residents, she couldn't stop thinking about you. She remembered you as the only family member who'd acknowledged Patricia in her Christmas cards, who'd sent flowers when Patricia died. It meant everything to her." That first night in Eleanor's bed, my bed, I listened to the unfamiliar sounds of Seattle. Rain pattering on the roof, the distant sound of ferry horns from the harbor, the city humming with life beyond my windows. My phone buzzed constantly with calls and texts from David and Melissa, each one more frantic than the last. "Mom, where are you? We need to talk about this properly. You can't just disappear." But I could, and I had. The next morning, I walked through Eleanor's neighborhood, my neighborhood, discovering coffee shops and bookstores, a farmer's market that happened twice a week, people who nodded good morning to strangers. At a local bank, I opened new accounts and met with a financial advisor who helped me understand my inheritance. The house was worth even more than initially estimated. Seattle's real estate market had been booming. Dorothy introduced me to Eleanor and Patricia's book club, 6 women who'd been meeting monthly for 15 years. "Eleanor always said she hoped you'd join us someday," said Janet, the group's unofficial leader. "She had such faith that you'd find your way here eventually." That Thursday, I sat in Eleanor's living room, my living room, discussing Louise Erdrich's latest novel with women who welcomed me not because of what I could provide, but because Eleanor had loved me. I started volunteering at a women's shelter downtown, helping other women navigate the systems I'd learned during my months of homelessness. Many were my age or older, made invisible by families who decided they were inconvenient. I understood their shame, their disbelief at finding themselves with nowhere to go. "It's temporary," I told them, the same words David had used with me. But I meant it differently, temporary because I was going to help them find permanent solutions. 3 months after I'd moved to Seattle, David called with news that chilled me. "Mom, I'm flying up there this weekend. We need to talk face to face about this situation." Situation. As if my new life was a problem to be solved rather than a blessing to be celebrated. "What situation is that, David? You living in some dead woman's house, playing pretend with strangers instead of being part of your real family." I spent the week before his visit thinking about what I wanted to say. The old Margaret would have cleaned frantically, cooked his favorite foods, tried to prove she deserved his approval. But the woman I'd become, the woman sleeping in Eleanor's bed, tending Eleanor's roses, carrying on Eleanor's traditions, had different priorities. I arranged flowers from the garden in Patricia's favorite vase and made reservations at a restaurant overlooking the water. David arrived on a Saturday morning, looking tired and older than his 32 years. He'd always been handsome, my ex-husband's strong jaw combined with my mother's dark eyes, but stress was beginning to show around the edges. He stood on my porch, looking up at the house with something between appreciation and resentment. "It's bigger than I expected," he said, as if admitting the house was impressive would cost him something. I gave him a tour, watching his face as he took in the hardwood floors, the built-in bookcases, the updated kitchen, the master suite with its bay window overlooking the water. In Eleanor's study, I showed him photo albums spanning decades, Eleanor and Patricia's life together, trips to Europe, quiet dinners with friends, the gradual accumulation of a lifetime's worth of memories. "She never had children," David observed, as if this diminished the value of Eleanor's life. Over lunch at a waterfront restaurant, David finally revealed why he'd come. "Mom, I need you to listen to me without getting defensive." I sipped my wine and waited. "Melissa and I have been doing some research. This whole inheritance thing, there might be tax implications you haven't considered. Estate taxes, capital gains when you sell the house. You could lose a significant portion of the money if you're not careful. We think," he continued, "that you should sell the house immediately and move back to Phoenix. We found a great financial advisor who specializes in sudden wealth management. Plus, with Melissa's pregnancy progressing, we really need family support. Tommy asks about you constantly." The manipulation was expertly crafted, financial fear combined with guilt about missing my grandson's childhood. "And," David added casually, "we found that perfect house I mentioned. With your help on the down payment, we could build real generational wealth." I set down my wine glass and looked at my son, really looked at him. He was still the little boy who'd cried when his goldfish died, the teenager who'd called me from college homesick and lonely. But he was also the man who'd handed me car keys when I needed shelter, who'd texted about job hunts while I was washing my hair in gas station bathrooms. "David," I said quietly, "do you remember what happened to me after the earthquake?" His face flushed. "Mom, we've been through this. We did what we could under difficult circumstances. You gave me your old car and directions to a parking lot where I could sleep safely. For 4 months. 4 months, David. Do you have any idea what that was like?" He looked out at the water, unable to meet my eyes. "You could have told us things were that bad." "I did tell you. You told me to be patient while you figured things out. You want to know what the worst part was?" I continued. "It wasn't sleeping in the car or washing my face in public restrooms. It was realizing that my own son could live 5 miles away and forget I existed. That Melissa could post Instagram photos of your family vacations while I was counting quarters for dollar menu burgers." David's jaw tightened. "That's not fair, Mom. You're making us out to be monsters." "I'm not making you out to be anything," I said. "I'm telling you what happened. And what I learned during those 4 months is that I deserve better than being someone's afterthought." I signaled for the check. Eleanor and Patricia built something beautiful together. This house, this community, this life full of books and music and friends who show up for each other. I want to be part of that, not part of a family that only remembers I exist when they need something. David leaned forward desperately. "Mom, please. I know we made mistakes. But we're family. That has to count for something." He was right, it should count for something. But family is supposed to be the people who catch you when you fall, not the ones who watch you hit the ground and ask why you didn't land more gracefully. "It does count," I said. "That's why it hurts so much." I dropped David at the airport the next morning. We sat in the car for a few minutes, both of us trying to find words that might bridge the gap between us. Finally, he broke the silence. "I love you, Mom. I know I haven't shown it well, but I do." "I love you too," I replied. "But love without action is just sentiment. And I'm too old for empty sentiments." He got out of the car and walked into the terminal without looking back. A year has passed since David's visit. He calls monthly now, usually brief conversations about Tommy's milestones or Melissa's pregnancy. She had a healthy baby girl they named Emma. Sometimes he asks how I'm doing, and I tell him about my volunteer work, my book club, the community garden I've helped establish in Eleanor's memory. Our conversations are polite but distant, like acquaintances staying in touch. But my life here has bloomed in ways I never expected. Dorothy has become the sister I never had, and together we tend the garden Eleanor and Patricia planted decades ago. The book club has adopted me completely. We've traveled to literary festivals together, and I'm hosting our Christmas party this year. At the shelter, I've helped dozens of women find stable housing and job training. Some of them have become close friends. Last month, I was having coffee with Janet from book club when she asked if I ever regretted leaving Phoenix. I thought about it, really thought about it. Did I miss seeing Tommy grow up? Absolutely. Did I regret choosing dignity over convenience? Not for a moment. My son gave me the greatest gift he could, I told her. He showed me exactly how much I was worth to people who claimed to love me. And then Eleanor showed me what I was actually worth. Sometimes losing everything is the only way to discover what you're truly worth. I'm worth more than sleeping in cars while my family plans their future. I'm worth more than being grateful for scraps of attention from people who see me as useful rather than valuable. And so are you. If this story teaches you anything, let it be this: never accept less than you deserve, even from family. Especially from family. Your worth isn't determined by other people's ability to see it.